Welcome to Revolutionary Motion, where we show you tennis from a different perspective. Today we're going to talk about something that we like to call the whipping effect. So what is the whipping effect? I'm sure all of you have heard of, using your arm to create like a whip on your tennis shots, okay? Mostly on your forehand, you hear this, on the backhand not as much, but it follows pretty much the same principle. It's just that you have two hands connected to it, which slows this effect down a little bit. So now let me show you what that effect actually is. So most people think you just have to take your wrist back and move it forward to slap the ball like a whip. So if you're now swinging with your whole arm, the racket will swing forward as the end of a whip would. Now, there's one little problem with that, and that is that like this, you're going to lose control. So you don't just want to slap the ball by just using your wrist motion back and forth on top of your arm motion. But what you also want to do is, you want to make sure that you have control over the angle of your racket. Now, how do you get that control over the angle of your racket? You have to make sure that while you're doing your backswing and you take your racket back, you position your hand and your wrist in the right way, so now the upper body rotation that pulls the arm will result in the wrist flicking or whipping forward in the right angle. Now that seems pretty complicated at first, but what it actually just means is that you have to make sure that your wrist is bent in a way that now if you straighten it back out, a hitting motion that is preferable, in this case depending on how much spin you want to add, a slightly different angle in your wrist, happens as a result. So you don't want to actively swing your wrist in order to create that whipping effect, because as you can imagine, the end of the whip doesn't do that actively either. It happens as a passive reaction of what happens with the handlebar of the whip. And the same thing happens here with your upper body. That's your handlebar of the whip. So if your upper body turns the right way, the end of the whip has to swing in the correct way as well. Now let me show you real quick how you want to move your wrist on the backswing so you can actually create the whipping effect the right way and not lose control over your shots. So when you're taking your wrist back on the backswing, you obviously don't just keep it straight, because like that you don't have any whipping effect. But what you want to do is, you want to first move your wrist back horizontally, but you also want to move it back a little bit like this. You see how my racket now points downward a little bit? Like this, I make sure that if it straightens back out, two things happen. First of all, my racket will move forward, and second of all, my wrist wants to go back to straight. Now, very important here is that you involve your forearm a little bit as well. Because what we want here is, we want that motion through the ball to move this way, right? So we have a little bit of top spin by going up, and a little bit of forward motion to give it enough power to get over the net. So here we have to do basically the exact opposite of that on our backswing. Because if the opposite of that happens and we're taking our racket back the right way, now the upper body rotation will make sure that our arm goes back into a neutral position, which means if you swing fast enough, it moves through that neutral position in the way that you created in the beginning with your backswing. So we want to take our racket back like this, just horizontally, drop it a little bit, and when I drop it, you can see my forearm kind of rotating a little bit. This little bit of rotation here makes sure that when I swing, now it straightens back out. First of all, my forearm turns this way, and second of all, my wrist straightens out. So those things together create top spin as well as power. Now it seems a bit complicated at first, but I promise you, if you practice this on a daily basis and you really hold on to your racket tight enough, you will notice that it's much, much easier for you to create power now. And if you get used to it, you will be able to control every single one of your shots, including that whipping effect on every single forehand that you hit, so you can really hit the ball forward without much effort and create powerful forehands in the process.
And now we have one bad example for you guys where we don't move the wrist at all, and you can see how stiff it stays, and that's really how it shouldn't look. And then right after that, we have one more example where the wrist moves through the ball, creating that whipping effect and creating a lot of power in the process, and making it a lot simpler to really control your shots.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys soon.